Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that time, Jesus said to Nicodemus, "You must be born from above. The wind blows where it wills, and you can hear the sound it makes, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit." Nicodemus answered and said to him, "How can this happen?" Jesus answered and said to him, "You are the teacher of Israel, and you do not understand this? Amen, amen, I say to you, we speak of what we know, and we testify to what we have seen, but you people do not accept our testimony. If I tell you about earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you about heavenly things? No one has gone up to heaven except the one who has come down from heaven, the Son of Man. And just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, so that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My brothers and sisters, as we continue through this Easter season, we continue with the subject of being witnesses. And yesterday, our focus was on our yes to God. I would like to bring up, even though it's not in our readings, the blessed meeting between Mary and the angel at the Annunciation. Yesterday was all about our fiat, our yes, just as Mary gave her yes. And so yesterday we talked about how the more we give our yes, the more open we are to saying yes to God, the more he can give us. So often we receive sacraments and we don't get all of the benefits till we open our hearts wider with our yes. Today's readings are on the other side of the conversation. If we're in a conversation with God, yesterday was what Mary said. Today is what the angel says. Today is what God is saying. And so we have this continuing conversation of Jesus and Nicodemus. And Nicodemus is asking all sorts of questions and Jesus is answering. Well, today, Jesus describes how God works in our world. And it's something very close to my heart. God works like the wind. I want you to know my favorite part of North Dakota is watching the wind carry the snow. Because the wind is invisible. And it's the snow that makes it visible. Jesus is explaining to Nicodemus that even though God is invisible, we still see his effects on our lives. There's an old expression that there's no coincidence with God. There's no coincidence in our lives. There's only providence. So if something good happens to you, well, God is blessing you. It wasn't a coincidence at all. God is at work. There is a reason that happened. There's a reason we're still living. We have purpose. There's something we need to do. And so, my brothers and sisters, when God is speaking, it doesn't always have to be through words. It could be through just a thought that occurs to you. It could be seeing someone who just happens to come in front of you that is in need. All of that is ways that God speaks to us in our lives. In our first reading today, we have a description of the early community in the church. And what's amazing is they're of one mind and heart. There is no needs among them. There's no possessions. They share everything. This is a miracle. Even if you had a group and tried to give them rules to do this, believe me, there would be chaos. What is being shown to us of this early was no merit of their own. It was to show that God was with them, that there was an outside force there amongst them, keeping the harmony, keeping the peace, keeping the love. One of my favorite stories in the church had to do with Napoleon Bonaparte. One time Napoleon told a bishop, "I will destroy the Catholic Church." And the bishop laughed and looked at him and said, "If we haven't done it in the last 1,500 years, you can't do it." In other words, our church is a perfect church made up of imperfect, sinful people. Just the fact that our church exists, that our church has endured, and that our church is what it is today is a miracle and proof that God is here in this church. It's not something you can plan. Only God can hold it together. And I would like to end today with just a few thoughts in regards to Reverend David Hayes, whom we are honoring. And of course, I met him only 2 or 3 times. In our gospel today, it says that God is unpredictable like the wind. You don't know where he comes from and where he goes. Well, the more we're close to God, the more we're like that. The more we see things that God is telling us to do, and we veer off unpredictably. People have told me stories of Reverend Hayes and his ancient car. I think it was a station wagon that, I think they said more than 300 or 400,000 miles on it, that it just would not die. And it's ministers like Reverend Hayes and like Father Bob who go where God sends them, who literally show up where they're needed. And when you see this, it's not them that you're seeing anymore. It's the wind. It's God that's moving them. And they are just the specks of snow that are riding that breeze. They are just a hand that God is moving with the body in order to serve him. And so today we honor Reverend Hayes in thanksgiving for all he did for our community. And we seek this relationship with God, that we not only can see the unseeable God in the wind, but we too can ride the wind and let the wind move us. That through us, God can do more in the world. That more people can see God through us specks of snow floating on